Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining Reza Negrestani's course, Simulating the World and Remodeling Philosophy. This is going to be a 12-session course. Is that correct, Reza?
Yes, 12 sessions.
And I think I'm just going to read through the course description here before we start. Long ignored by philosophers of science and epistemologists, only recently the concept of models has come to the forefront of philosophical scrutiny. Nevertheless, since the dawn of discovery and invention, engineers, designers, and craftsmen have in one way or another treated models as the most treasured tools in their armature of available equipments and methods. This 12-session seminar engages with models broadly understood. We will study a wide range of models, from diagrams to scientific models and children's toys, only to arrive at their true significance in simulating our world and refabricating it. The first 6 sessions are centered on the study of models, old and new, in order to grasp what actually counts as a model and learn its range of applications. In the second half of the seminar, we will investigate a model-centered vision of discovery and invention, where philosophy, art, design, and science not only are integrated, but also help us to rethink and build a different world. The ideal audience for this seminar are people interested in history, philosophy, science, engineering, and design. All right, I'm going to pass the mic to Reza Negrestani now, and thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Theo, and thank you, everyone, for participating in this class. As I was just saying in the other channel, that I know many of you, but I also don't know some new participants, which is always good. It diversifies the class. So to that extent, it would be great, even those of you whom I know already, go one by one, introduce yourself, tell me a little bit about yourself, what you are working currently, and why is that you have taken this course. And then after that, we shall begin in earnest our own course.
Adam, would you like to start? You're the first on my list here.
Okay, sure. So I have a computer science and finance background. And in terms of research interests, I'm interested in software studies and models and complexity, which is something that Reza has also talked about a lot. It's pretty fundamental to all of that, and it seems like a pretty rich area to dig into, and that's why I was keen to be on this.
Thank you so much, Adam.
The next person I have is Alan, if you're ready to go.
Hey, my name is Alan. I live in Mexico City. I'm an architect, and I'm a certificate student here in the New Center. This is my second class. I'm also doing a master in critical theory. Well, the reason this course seems really interesting to me is because, well, architecture is really, the whole architectural practice is always in relation to models, like physical models, digital models, and also plans. And so it's something that it was never really a topic of discussion in architecture schools. It was, models were mainly seen as from its function of representation. So I'm really interested in the way that models can be thought to reinvent architectural practice. And I'm also working right now on the subject of smart cities. So I'm actually really interested in finding ways of thinking how the paradigm of smart cities implies like also like a way of modeling the city through data and algorithms. I think this course can help me think through those subjects.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Andrea, if you'd like to go.
Yes. Hi. Hello, everyone. So I'm Andrea, and currently I'm in London. I'm studying cultural studies at Goldsmiths, but in February I graduated philosophy in Italy, southern Italy. And well, I would say that my current research, which started from my dissertation, uh, basically involves the question concerning technology in some Heideggerian sense, and I'm trying to intersect this with some researches of Stigler, Simondon, Yukui, and meanwhile I'm currently studying more deeply all the new movements of philosophy, like from speculative realism to non-philosophy, in order to kind of build a sort of philosophical critique to artificial intelligence, which is, I mean, where is the field where I'm most interested currently, and I will try to connect the critique, sort of critique of machine learning on how to kind of on how this particular technology produce some cultural knowledge in order to to intersect it with my current institutional studies. And so yeah, I are really looking forward to this course, because I also would love to enhance my knowledge on the epistemological consequences of models and of other ingredients of science, and see how them then can provide a new perspective of the world. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Very fantastic. Excellent.
Thank you.
Artemis, would you like to go?
Hello, my name is Artemis. I'm also an architect as Alan, and I come from Greece. It's been almost a month and a half that I just arrived from New York, where I was working and experiencing the metropolis as an architect. I'm trying now to find a job and move to France, and I'm interested in philosophy because also in our studies in really experimental University of Thessaly, this is in Greece, it was always promoting to have it as a base to reading. Of course, I don't have a big background in it, but as much as I could, I was always wandering and reading, and that is the reason that I needed a stimulation in that field, and that's why I applied in this program. And this particular course, for the same reason as Alan, is really interesting for me. I mean, we're always around models, either digital or physical models, and we were always wondering if they are only a kind of process in our design stage, or they have sometimes some kind of autonomy. So yeah, I'm really excited to starting this.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm honored. Thank you.
Ian, would you like to go?
You bet. Ian, I'm here to give you my enthusiasm. Yeah, Ian Foxworth from Washington, D.C. I'm an attorney. You know, there's no great story here. There's no, like, I'm not coming with this sort of this philosophical project that I'm trying to finish. You know, I was a philosophy undergrad. While working as an attorney, you know, picked up a master's in philosophy, and I'm just sort of, you know, after all that, and while also working, it's more that I'm, you know, still looking for a place to start. Then I have some particular project, and I've heard, you know, great things about Reza, of course.
Most intriguing. Thank you so much. Really, actually, it's fantastic that we have such a very, very diverse, participant and audience. I've never had an attorney in my life, but hopefully you won't be the first. You won't be the last one.
Well, I would congratulate you on that. But
thank you so much. Utterly appreciate it.
JP, would you like to go next? JP, sorry.
Here.
Sorry, it's me, JP.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I didn't hear you clearly. So, well, I have a background in philosophy and music, working on a project about form and scale. So I think towards the problem of scale, the theme of this course, it seemed to me fitting to see if it goes somewhere I couldn't go. I mean, in my individual studies, and besides that, I'm very appreciative of Reza's work, so that's why I'm here. Well, that's it, I think. I live in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, so that's it.
Fantastic, Jean-Pierre. Thank you so much.
Jovan, would you like to go?
Yeah. Hi. I work on non-standard philosophy, philosophy of science, and interested in philosophy of science in an analytic and continental tradition, and I like Rosa's work. So, hi.
Super. Thank you, Jovan.
And Justin. Hopefully we have sound.
Hey, what's going on? I just got in late. Actually, there was something weird with the links. I was in like another side chat room, and there was actually another student still over there. So
The haunted chat. Yes.
I'll deal with that one. Thank you for letting me know.
it was Lenka or something like that. I could probably sign into that other one, but I have to sign out of this to go back over there.
No, it's okay. I can.
We need to collect the wounded and bring them back to camp.
Yeah, pretty interesting. I don't have much to say. I guess I'm just kind of a renegade, lost thinker, just digging through things, and also inspired by Reza's work. Glad to be here and learning.
Thank you so much, Justin. Thank you very much.
And Mari, would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Mari Bastashevsky. I guess I'm trans everything and find a sense of this world because I'm now in Lausanne, but I'm in no way Swiss. And I don't fit here at all, and I don't fit in any disciplines straightforward either. I guess I worked for many years as a visual artist on trying to parse conflict economies and the way in the identitarian fictions fit into that, and I kind of use photography as an excuse to have philosophical performance where I would enter places like State Department or Foxconn factory or the port of Jebel Ali. I've been to many fascinating places and have very direct conversations and also expose myself and then turn this into an artwork. So I don't do that anymore. I'm working on it's a big word. I'm looking at two parallel projects. One is about transmimetic opportunities for environmental survival and seeing ourselves more as both animals and machines, and the other is close to what Andrea was explaining also about machine intelligence and algorithmic philosophy. I think the reason for me to join this class is threefold. First of all, I'm hopelessly depressed and I think everything is completely meaningless on personal and planetary way, and it feels like a good place to be in that state without being told that everything will work out if you send another email or if you work just a little bit harder. And I think second is art is always for me a form of a model already. And third, more importantly, I like the way Reza thinks, and I think it's rare to find sort of no bullshit philosophy and way of being, and intuitively I just feel like it's a good place for me to be in, and that's not nothing.
Thank you so much, Mari. Very, very great. Really, absolutely. Thank you so much.
And Mikey?
Hey, I'm Mikey from Portland, Oregon. This is Sanka hanging out with me. Can't do that in the university. But yeah, so I kind of came to like theory and philosophy like when I was a teenage anarchist back in the day, and discovered like lots of work from there, and it kind of evolved. And it's mostly been like a personal like passion of mine in the background. But my formal training is actually in culinary arts, where I worked in like high-end fine dining for about 10 years. And now I am a coffee educator. So I just teach people about coffee and senses and how to be a barista. So recently I started, or about a year ago, I started this project called Aleatory Books, focusing on critical philosophy and theory. And it's just kind of a way for me to branch outside of my own little inner world and connect with more people, and which led me to being at the New Center. So I'm a certificate student here, and I've been following Rez's work for a long time, and this class in particular is really interesting me just because the ideas of models and creating new ways to frame thought and, you know, to communicate them in between people, especially in interdisciplinary work, and also to form new ideas. I think there's a lot of potential, and I'm very interested to explore those.
Thank you. Thank you, Mikey.
Thanks. Yeah.
And Sean?
Hello, my name is Sean Matheru. Let's see, I'm not sure what the question was, so I'm just gonna introduce myself. I'm a PhD student at University of California, Riverside. I study French, Francophone, English, and Arabic philosophy and fiction, although the philosophy part has been something that I've had to kind of bracket. I mean, comparative literature departments are definitely amenable to the study of philosophy, but I feel like it's something I've had to kind of engineer on the side. And it's gotten to a point where I really want to do a project. I'm writing my dissertation right now, and I'm super interested in Rez's particular approach to it. Yeah, so I'm excited to be here. I study, let's see, fiction. I'm interested particularly in fiction where consciousness and landscape are kind of interwoven. So a very influenced by Ballard, weird fiction, and surrealism, modernism, a bunch of things. And I'm interested in kind of understanding how the study of fiction might produce models that we can apprehend outside of phenomenological subject positions. So particularly, I'm interested in the way that environmental and racial violence are kind of coded in literature. And I'm interested in trying to present that objectively. And so I'm interested in the study of models, and I'm excited to be here, and it's nice to meet everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Fantastic background. Really, really, thank you.
And Lenka, we're just doing introductions. I know you just came in. Would you like to introduce yourself? Can you hear us at all? Can you hear me? Okay, I think your mic isn't working, but I'm just gonna. Oh, there. Now we can hear you.
Is it working now?
Yeah, I think so. Or wait, no, that's my.
Okay, great. No.
Oh, it is you. It's you.
I don't know what is it.
You're just a little
So
delayed
is it me?
by 20 milliseconds.
Wait, so you can't hear me, or can you now?
Yes.
We can hear you. We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Sorry. I just, it's confusing day. I just missed my flight, and I'm kind of, but I did my bachelor studies in Prague, and it was in Department of Aesthetics, and then my MA was in London, and I wrote on Deleuze and Adorno, and now I want to apply for PhD, and I want to continue to work on Deleuze and on pluralization of time in the last, that I would like to somehow suspend the third synthesis and decentralize it. And yeah, I know I tend to think in terms of models, but I didn't reflect on it properly, so that's why it feels yeah, like something I should do.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
And my name is Theodore, just in case people haven't met me before. I'm going to be assisting moderating the course. So feel free to contact me if you have any technical problems. And I've been studying with Reza for a little bit now. And I'm interested in how we ground our model making practices.
Yes. Thank you, Theo. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, everyone. Really, really glad to have you here today. Okay, let's not waste any more time on pleasantries and just get into our own discussion. So, the first thing is that how does this course evolve over 12 sessions? Well, Theo already gave a kind of abstract of the entire course. But in addition to that, I would say that today we are not going to go into any kind of technical details. It's just way too early to do that. We will go into very technical details, but hopefully in future sessions. Today, we are just simply going to talk about models, but not just any kind of model. We are actually going to talk about scientific models, models as such. You should understand that, and I'm sure that you already know, that the concept of model is usually used in a very common sense, loose sense, such that model, when we are using the word model, we can mean a lot of different things. Some of them might actually be contradicting other connotations of the word model. For example, we just think of models as these approximations of reality out there. Sometimes we think that models are forms of representation. Sometimes we think that models are simplifications of the items in the world. Nevertheless, there is something in common among all such loose talks about model. Models are supposed to give us some insight. We do not yet know what that insight is about the world of which we are a part. And the very distinction between a scientific model and the loose talk of a model is that such criteria as how a model gives us some insight about the items on the world, and by which methods it can give us some insight about the world, are made explicit. They are tractable now. They can be replicated. They can be investigated further. They can be recalibrated, in fact, so as to yield more refined model. Whereas in the loose talk of the model, we cannot do these kinds of stuff systematically. This doesn't mean that we are not going to talk about loose models. Like, for example, graphs, diagrams, gestures, so on and so forth. But in order for us to actually grasp the significance of models, particularly in the realm of sciences, engineering, so on and so forth, we first need to begin with a very strict non-lavish, parsimonious description of models. Instead of beginning with this kind of forest where we have different concepts of models, we begin with a territory in which the forest has been cut back, the metaphysical forest has been cut back, and we have tractable, accessible criteria of epistemological assessment peculiar to science. So this is how we are going to start. And of course, we will expand, we will make examples. I don't think that we should make any technical example at this point. Technical examples, I would say that if we bring them up at this point, they might actually create more confusion. Nevertheless, please do ask a question if something that I say might strike you as vague. Even aside from that, feel free to question any moment that you want. I just don't want you to listen to me as if basically, everything is fine. Anything, any word, even a word that appears vague to you, interrupt me, ask me a question. I really don't mind about that. Well, you can ask questions either on the sidebar and hopefully Theo will monitor it, or you can just simply unmute your microphone and ask me a question anytime you want. And for those of you who are new, we will usually have a break at some point, like 30 minutes from now, at the middle of our class. And then we come back. It's like usually a 5 minutes break, so we can have a cigarette. Of course, I'm having my cigarette here now, but nevertheless, having some water, so on and so forth. And then we come back. Usually, I teach and go overboard with courses. This time, I actually want to stay within the time frame, so you don't get tired, because unfortunately I understand that these kinds of materials can actually bore even the most staunch, enthusiastic students of philosophy. We don't want you to get bored, and that's really important for you to ask questions. Heckle me whenever you want. So, I think the best way to start our discussion of the scientific models and what actually models are, starting from Michael Weisberg's new book, Simulation and Similarity. It is a splendidly lucid and rigorous work. It is what you might call to be the distillation of many, many studies that has been done in the history of science with regard to models. But it also actually gives something more, precisely because from a historical standpoint, in the philosophy of science and epistemology, models, not all models, first of all, not all models were considered to be models, but also what used to be called model was deemed as some sort of ancillary or auxiliary theme for philosophy of science. It was not what you might call to be a central point of philosophy of science. The more scientists and engineers have looked into what models are, scientific models are, the more they have realized that models do in fact enjoy a central point in their study of real phenomena, and also the epistemological methods of modern sciences. In that regard, you might say that the serious study of models began from something like early 70s by the work of Supis, the semantic model or the semantic view of models. But even then, their work were fundamentally rudimentary. The true, genuine study of models began in tandem with the study of complex systems. Something around, I would say, mid-80s. And then it got refined over time, and now in 21st century, finally, we have the first, systematic works about what models are, what the procedure of modeling entails, so on and so forth. So let me read a little bit of Michael Weisberg. And do you have the PDF of it? Yes, okay, great. So let's just go a little bit. I'm going to read this because, to be honest with you, I couldn't come up with a better, more lucid exemplification for what can be considered as a scientific model. So, page 1, 2 aquatic puzzles. San Francisco drinking water travels 167 miles from Yosemite National Park's Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. How do you pronounce it? Is it Polgas Water Temple in San Francisco. The temple marks the end of the water journey with the biblical promise, I give waters in the wilderness and rivers in the desert to give drink to my people. These words were inscribed to remind the residents of the Bay Area of the fragility of their water supply. This fragility weighed heavily on the minds of many San Franciscans, but on no one more than John Reber, an amateur musical theater producer whose business cards admonished, without water, there is no life. To cut the story short, Reber began to think about a very, very ambitious project to create 2 dams such that these 2 dams regulate the water flow. And in that sense, San Francisco has what you might call to be an infinite reservoir of water for the years to come. Now, everyone around that time backed him up. Politicians, scientists, many, many engineers, so on and so forth. However, he had also an opponent. And this opponent brought up a very, what you might call to be a strong debate against Reber, reminding him, or basically telling him, that this all good on paper, but if you actually implement such a plan, it fundamentally leads to a disaster for aquatic life. To the point that it creates a natural disaster. People told him that you are vague, you are reactionary, you are just trying to undermine a great mind. Everyone is, who are you to, make such a statement? Nevertheless, he went on with the backup of a few supporters to create one of the most majestic models in the history of engineering. San Francisco Delta Bay system model. The thing is that they started to measure, of course, you know, when we are talking about measurement, we are in the business of approximation already. The tidal waves, the kind of torrential flows in the streams of water, the salinity level of water in San Francisco Bay area, you know, the elevations, the topographic elevations of the, what you might call to be the bed, basically everything had some sort of data about it gathered. So they started to create this kind of massive, imagine like a big warehouse. It's not just like these kind of small architectural planes that we make, or what engineers make, these kind of small toy things. No, it was a massive model, the size of a whole compound, where they started to simulate the torrential flow by way of these water pumps. They had already created at various scales relevant to the data they had, the elevation of the bed, the salinity of water, so on and so forth. And then they started to look at the behavior of the system over this time, over a period of time. Unfortunately, Reber died before the data came in. The data showed that according such approximates, given such model, which tries to be in fidelity, in completely, fidel, representationally, dynamically, to the target system at hand, namely Bay Area Delta system, if these two dams are being built, it would lead to an absolute disaster. Now you see, here a lesson to be learned. Sometimes it is actually wrong to deal with the real system and come up with a solution from what we take to be a real system. Sometimes we have to make a model, and only through the study of model, indirectly, we can shed some fundamental insights about the real phenomenon that we took for granted. And because of we were taking it for granted, we came up with all sorts of whimsical solutions. This is a very famous engineering example, which of course Michael Weisberg also cites it. Question before I move to the second example. Anything, anyone, please? If you don't ask me questions, I will force you to ask me questions, and you don't want me to force you in the first session. Go on, Maria.
I have a question, but I'm afraid it's too early. I haven't read the book. I kept thinking about Flint, and I think in terms of targets, it's a very fascinating case because it seems like a problem of water, and you can build models around scientific and engineering issues, which is what is continued to happen in Flint. But then we need a very different kind of model to actually understand why it didn't work.
Yes.
And my question is, I guess, because I want to have a question here, is Is it at all possible to have this analogy here, or it's completely inappropriate and a bit too distant?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Is this a working analogy? Because I keep coming back to that case.
Yes, absolutely. But I would say that the case of Flint, I mean, and my apologies, I mean, I know just basically the what you might call to be the pseudo facts that have been circling on internet, in the news media, and some papers. I don't know any details about it, whereas I do actually, in fact, know the details about the San Francisco Bay Delta system modeling. The thing I would say with regard to Flint, we just don't need something like what you might call to be a model of a natural phenomenon, but also we need something like a model of the social distribution system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you know, of course, I will come back to this. The third model that I'm going to talk about, which is, of course, it's a very classical model, Thomas Schelling. Which of you know Thomas Schelling, by the way?
Just from this book.
Yes, and do you know who he was? He was an advisor, security advisor to many US presidents. He's essentially the man who coined the word MAD, mutually assured destruction. He was the ultimate game theorist who came up with a game theoretical framework upon which the competition or rivalry in the Cold War can be sufficiently understood. And of course, he actually became famous because of developing a model called the segregation model. It's essentially a distribution model of population that leads to segregation, regardless of any belief, so on and so forth. It's just what you might call to be a game theoretic population model. So I would say that a Flint case requires a bunch of models integrated precisely because it is not just what you might call to be a natural disaster. It is actually the consequences of a series of phenomena at different scales, social, economical, so on and so forth. So, if you don't have any question, let me just get some of my stuff here, notes. So, another classical example is Vito Volterra. He was a senator in Italy and also a very, very famous mathematician and a statistician. The thing is that after the World War I, fishermen in the Adriatic Sea, they noticed that they are not getting a good yield anymore for some strange reason. Nothing drastic had happened. You know, there was no pesticide, there was no oil leak, so on and so forth. It's just that the fishery yield was drastically suboptimal. So they started to approach a person who then began to go through these fisher markets, you know, keeping the tally of the kind of products that they are getting every day from any, you know, boat, market, so on and so forth. And he also actually realized that it is not just that they believe this is the case, it is actually the case. In fact, stingrays, sharks, these big fishes are actually come up more on the market in the net of the fishermen than cod, salmon, so on and so forth. Like literally, these small fishes, they don't have them anymore. This person went to his, I think, father-in-law, if I'm not mistaken, who was Vito Volterra. Vito Volterra also did the same kind of exercise. He began to roam around the fisheries, the boats, and keep the tally. And then, unlike the first modeler, he didn't actually create what you might call to be a concrete model in order to solve the problem. But he started to use pencil and paper, turning the statistical evidences that he had garnered from his study of the fisheries into some simple equations, calculus. In fact, not any kind of equations, but differential calculus equations. One of these equations stands for one population of prey, and the other equation stands for a population of predators. This is what you might call to be Volterra's equations of prey and predatory population. Once he developed these equations, he noticed that given the differential calculus implications of these equations, in any society where you have at least one population of prey and one population of predator, adverse effects, if they are mild, like for example, just think of oil leak, for example, in Adriatic Sea. Or, for example, the abundance of pesticides or biocides. If they are mild, they actually they are more in favor of predators and have adverse effect on the population of prey. But if there is an intense level of biocides, pesticides, or any kind of adverse factor, within this dynamic, it would be in the favor of prey. So then you can easily guess what his solution was to this problem. In order for you to get more fishes, cods, whatever you think, rather than just these big predators, you have to actually increase the intensity of fishing. Many people then actually noticed it was completely right. The reason that these fishermen couldn't anymore get at an optimal level the fish that they could get before the World War was because the World War I had already forced them to quit fishery. Essentially, fishery in that region had become minimized throughout the years of World War I, and hence the predators population had increased unproportionally. And the only way that they could balance this is by intense fishing to create a more balanced population dynamics such that they can have more fish. Number two. Any question at this point? everyone is so shy always on the first session. I just don't like this. Jean-Pierre, you are laughing. It's your turn to say something.
Actually, what's going on? Is the sound okay?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Not really. Actually, I was just thinking that perhaps my questions would be too soon as well, because one thing is to build a model which, in some sense, replicates the physical conditions of a phenomenon at another scale, which is the first example. And another thing is to mathematize the conditions of the phenomenon itself, which it seems to me to be the second example. So I'm sure you will get to this eventually.
Right.
So
Yes.
I'm not sure if it's as an appropriate question for now. I mean,
no, that is good. That is absolutely good. The thing is that I will actually talk about this, that not all models are mathematical. And this is, of course, the topic of our today's session, the classification of models, scientific models. We have concrete models, at the very least, concrete models, mathematical models, and computational models. Concrete model example was the Bay Area.
Yep.
Now the mathematical model is Volterra's, prey dynamics. And the computational model, after the break, the cigarette break, as if I hadn't had enough cigarettes, would be Schelling segregation model. And of course, yes, each of these models are beholden to the meta-theoretical and theoretical implicit commitments or the framework in which they have been made. But this is not just exclusive to the idea of modeling. The same hidden assumptions about theory and meta-theoretical assumptions plague as much the science of modeling as they do the method of theorization or direct representation, which of course I will also make example of it by way of Darwin and Mendeleev table of elements. Now, shall we have a 5 minutes break and then come back?
Sure, that sounds good.
Excellent. See you in 5 minutes. Any question before we begin?
Are you going to talk about the fiction modeling stuff, Rosa?
Yes, but not this session. Basically, precisely because, as I mentioned, the word modeling is being used in a very quite loose sense. It is important for us to start to actually look at what the science of modeling is today, what it is about. And then surely we can branch to, fictional models, diagrams, graphs, so on and so forth. Yes, and we will do that, yes. And of course, a very special class of models, which I would say that only in the last decade or so has been brought up, and it's fundamental for the study of not of real phenomena, but the study of models themselves, which are called toy models. And we will also look at those, what toy models are. The small toy models and big toy models, fundamentally different kinds.
Awesome.
Ian, do you have any feedback, input, anything?
At this point, no.
Okay. Don't feel free though. Heckle me whenever I say something is stupid.
Oh no! So far so good.
Okay.
I will save up my heckles for, the big things.
Yes, good. Theo, what about you?
No questions yet. I'm just listening.
Okay. Artemis, anything?
Well, I have many questions, but it's actually around architecture models. Like, we were always struggling on abstraction of how we represent the existing and how we represent what we propose. And we were always fighting all those kitschy representations of the real.
Yes.
Why you put the trees, you don't need it. But it's totally different. I mean, the example you gave with scientific experimentation, when you need actually some data that they need to be almost the same, let's say, as the real. So yeah, I'm just thinking
Now,
of
this is
that.
something that we are going to talk about. You see, I would say, to a great extent, architectural models, when I was younger, many years ago, I used to work in an architecture firm. And the thing is that with architectural models, they are not exactly scientific models. They are models nevertheless, in the sense that they try to abstract away from a real phenomenon, okay? But not all forms of abstraction of reality or real phenomenon or approximations of a real phenomenon can be called a model. For something to be called a model should have first an interpreted structure. Now, this interpreted structure is fundamentally a theoretical business, as we will talk about. And at the very least, within the theoretical framework upon which this structure has been installed, there should be also a model description. Usually, this model description is laid out in terms of simple equations or algorithms, whether it's mathematical or computational, or an ancillary model, a smaller model, which captures both the theory and the framework of data under study. Now, this latter one is not called either mathematical model or computational model. This is usually peculiar and exclusive to what is called in science a concrete model. Like Drosophila, the fruit fly, is in fact a model or organism. Scientist, but also a lamprey. Do any of you know what a lamprey is? The delicacy usually Roman emperors used to get rid of their rivals by shoving them into a pool of lampreys. So they can basically, they're worse than sharks. They just like, there are these like jets, massive amount of teeth that they can just simply dig through your flesh. But the thing is that with lampreys, they are considered to, from a biological perspective, an evolutionary biological perspective, they are considered to be representing one of the oldest instances of neurological development. Like Drosophila, that gives us information across the board about the genome, the genetic regulation of many, many species across the board. Lampreys also give us information, general information about neurulation, or simply the evolution of the nervous system across the board of all organisms. Now, these kinds of models are not really mathematical or computational. Nevertheless, they are models precisely because they shed light in about the kind of phenomena that we are studying, the genome, the nervous system, so on and so forth. And the thing is that the description of such models, as you see, comes down to a different, a smaller model, rather than some form of equation or an algorithm. Shall we start here?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So the third example, and let me just read line by line Michael Weisberg. About Schillings model of segregation. Page 13, computational model, Schelling's segregation model. Thomas Schelling's Micro-Motives and Micro-Behavior, 1978, contains a very simple model that shows how racial segregation can occur even when no racism is present. The model is agent-based, meaning that each individual is explicitly represented, usually by a dot. You can, in fact, go and from a statistical perspective, think of it as a coin having two sides, or a dice. In his particular implementation of the model, dimes and nickels represented two types of individuals, A and B, and the squares on a chessboard represented a spatial location. In this model, each individual prefers that at least 30% of its neighbors be of the same type. 30% of its neighbor should be of its, either if it is A, 30% should be A. If it is B, at the very least, 30% should be also B. This is what you might call to be satisfaction criteria. If it is not, which is from a game theoretic perspective, this is indexed by a function called a utility function, reward and punishment. If the criteria is satisfied, A remains where it is. If it is not, it moves away. It punishes the neighborhood. Each individual prefers that at least 30% of its neighbors be of the same type, of the same type. So the A's want at least 30% of their neighbors to be A's, and likewise for the B's. Schelling neighborhood were defined as a standard Moore's neighborhoods, a set of 9 adjacent grid elements. An agent standing on some grid element E can have anywhere from 0 to 8 neighbors in the adjoining elements. Although Schelling didn't explicitly provide a utility function broadly can be understood in a game theoretic way as what you might call to be reward and punishment function. The preference described above is usually interpreted to mean that each agent is indifferent between having 30 to 100% of its neighbors be alike, but will be dissatisfied with fewer than 30% like. Because of the constraints of the grid's geometry, in case of a full neighborhood, the preference boils down to wanting to have at least 3 of 1/8 neighbors to be alike, and to equally prefer 3 to 8. The dynamics of Schelling's model involve agents sequentially choosing to remain in place or move to a new location. When it is an agent's turn to make a decision based on the utility function, and the utility function is that if it is less than 30%, I'm going to move out of this neighborhood. Regardless of whether I'm a racist or not. This is a game theoretic view. We are not talking about ideological views here. If this condition is met, the agent is satisfied and remains where it is. If it is not, the agent then moves to the nearest empty location. This sequence of decisions continue until all of the agents are happy where they are and do not try to move. Now, the dynamics of the model unfold as a cascade and are depicted in the figure on the page 14. Agents that were originally satisfied can become dissatisfied as soon as a neighbor leaves or a new one moves in. And this leads to a new agent becoming dissatisfied. A small patch of dissatisfaction will result in widespread movement and ultimately segregation. Though there are a few grid configurations that are integrated where every agent is happy, these are quite rare and nearly impossible to resolve from agent movement. The equilibrium state of the model is segregation. Thus, Schelling's major result is that a small preferences for similarity can lead to massive segregation. This result is quite robust across many changes to the model, including different utility functions, different rules for updating, different neighborhood sizes, and different spatial configurations. In fact, it is extremely hard to avoid segregation when agents have some preference for like neighborhoods. Now the thing, however, so first we had the Bay Area Delta System model, concrete model. Then we have Volterra's prey and predator equations, which was a mathematical model. The segregation model differs from the previous two insofar as this model and the prediction of equilibrium state, namely segregation, can only be done for any target system by way of an algorithm, a computational program. Hence, we see that we are in the business of three main classes of models: concrete, mathematical, and computational. Questions?
Yeah, I have a question about the computational model. So in this situation, is the algorithm, could it be understood as a kind of a mediator between the model itself? So in this case, the, I suppose, tendency towards segregation, or rather equilibrium as segregation, would be mediated by an algorithm. So I'm kind of wondering what is on the other end of that. So would it be, in this situation, the particular persons, for example, that are, so are they like affected by the algorithm, or is it the algorithm that is mediating between the individuals and the equilibrium understood as segregation, perhaps as model?
You see, the thing about neither mathematical model nor the computational model, there is what you might call to be no, also even in fact concrete model. And this is the whole point of models. Models are indirect representations, in the sense that basically, according to some meta-theoretical assumptions, we already have presupposed, even though implicitly, that model is in a way isomorphic to the real phenomenon, according to some theoretical assumptions. Now, so we absolutely don't even talk about the real population.
Okay.
That's just out of question. We just talk about the behavior of elements of the model itself. For example, here in the segregation, we are simply interested in the computational, recursive computational elements which undergird the behavior of agents, A's and B's, dimes and nickels, over this grid platform, to see that given, for example, such and such constraints, how, under what time frame, under what kind of behaviors, the state of equilibrium is reached, namely segregation. Given these thus and so initial and boundary conditions. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that the model is in the air, is a kind of an idealist kind of, stuff. But the modeler first wanted to actually look at the behavior of the model itself before even submitting it to reality. At the end of the day, however, all of these models should have their isomorphy or one-to-oneness with reality be investigated by extending the model into the reality, into the real phenomena, and see how it actually, what kind of behaviors that are going on in the real phenomena it distorts, which ones it, with a relative accuracy, represents, and which ones it ignores. This is what actually a model is. Anything other than that would count as a direct abstract representation. So essentially, when we are trying to theorize about the world from a scientific perspective, we have a direct approach and an indirect approach. Models are always an indirect approach, precisely because they are mediated encounters with reality. Surely, the very fact that we create a model requires some sort of traction on the real phenomenon, according to our theoretical commitments. But once we make the model, once we have the model, then we are no longer looking at reality. We are analyzing the model itself. In fact, I mean, from a philosophical perspective, and maybe I am mistaken, but this is a good challenge for you, those of you who are so into Kant and these kinds of stuff. I know some of you. You can think about that whether the statements that we derive from models, when we are analyzing the model itself, regardless of the reality, are analytical or synthetic. Please do, Mari.
I don't want to sound stupid, and I don't know if it's beside the point or maybe too soon, but for me, this model fell apart because it seems the premise of likeness is impossible to establish because, I mean, what about synchronicity of the asynchronous? Someone thinks I'm alike, but I'm nothing like alike, and then who's like the whole notion of likeness? And I don't mean just in terms of ideology, but I mean, where is the science and fiction here? Because we can't really, if to idealize away, we could say white, but if we have to zoom in again to face reality, we'll very quickly realize that there's no one alike or everyone is alike. And then the very premise of the model is falling apart for me there.
Right. No, this is absolutely a genuine question and something that we will talk about at length. The principles which undergird any kind of scientific modeling are based on two fundamental criteria: simulation and similarity. Which means that, sure, the thing is that once we analyze the model, we shouldn't actually look at reality. But the application, you see, there is two different things. We are dealing with two different phases, and these two different phases should be included in the science of modeling. One is what you might call to be the construction and analysis of the model. The construction of an analysis, so phase one, construction. It requires some sort of isomorphy with a target system, namely a real phenomenon. Then the analysis of the model. At this point, we just really do not want to look at the real phenomenon, because it actually gives us too much complexity, too much unnecessary information. Now, a stage three is what you might call to be the application to the target system, the real phenomenon. At this point is what you might call to be the optimization occurs. Sure, we have made some really fictional, ideal model that doesn't have any roots, apparently, doesn't have any roots in reality. But the thing is that as long as we have some sort of what you might call to be a semblance of isomorphy or correspondence, we would be able to not only enrich our model by new details garnered from the data we have got from the real environment, but also revise portions of our model. So it is not just that model is just like this free-floating thing. It comes in stages. Each stage requires its own procedures.
So I have a thought. maybe just some clarification. I'm trying to like frame this, and I'm mostly thinking about kind of analyzing when you start to deal with the model, you're actually looking at the model, and then looking at the concepts that went into going to build the model. So it's just like stepping like backwards. Particularly, I'm thinking about the predictive policing algorithms, in a sense where it's, they take data from different neighborhoods where it's most likely that a crime will occur, and they send out basically higher patrols, or setting up police always kind of like stay in that block, and will give numbers of arrests that are expected there. And in like practical application, it becomes it kind of validates itself because they can reinforce that information through kind of enacting it, in the sense that the algorithm creates this like feedback loop of itself, but it's all based on those original base concepts that went into it that were kind of based on a flawed system to begin with.
Yes.
So yeah, I think it's like taking those steps back, like those movements where it's like even when you can apply it, you find it working in environment, but the flaws beyond the model.
Okay. If I and please, Mikey, tell me if I'm wrong at or if I'm misrepresenting your argument. Essentially, you are saying that, if I'm not mistaken, that once we make a model, this kind of idealized approximation, so we have some sort of algorithm or mathematical equations, and these mathematical equations, once taken as way of how we understand the real phenomenon, precisely because they are already idealized, they can create distortions down the line, such that the dynamic interaction between the model and the real phenomena within this framework create more distorted data. You get a stuff from an idealized model, you transport them back into the real world, and then those data are already getting distorted even more, and then back and forth and back and forth, and just simply you are creating an environment that shouldn't be called by any means a scientific epistemic procedure. It is as if like a political manhandling or gerrymandering of the model.
Yeah, it's always like curious and you see this a lot, obviously, in this kind of climate where people use these models or use these statistics to build arguments, and where the actual like kind of science is completely lost because they have data.
It's not even in like politics. I mean, you can see a lot of these kinds of stuff in evolutionary biology.
Yep.
Now the thing is that, well, this is something that we are going to address under the question of model pluralism. That surely every singular model is going to distort. In fact, all models distort. But the thing is that we just cannot go on and try to predict a certain kind of behavior, describe or explain certain kind of behavior, certain kind of phenomenon without models. This is necessary. This is necessary. Now, there should also be supplemented with what you might call to be strategies of model distortion mitigation, where we mitigate the distorting effect or effects of models. To do that, of course, we can refine our models, calibrate them ever more, but that has its own limits. There is another way to go on about it, by supplementing models with ancillary models, models that actually regulate and monitor how our previous model coordinates with the real phenomena. This is what I would call a big toy model, and we will get back to these stuff. Go on, yeah.
There we go. No, I was just thinking, I mean, that if you have models, you know, algorithms mixed with other algorithms, you know, managed by further algorithms, at what point is there a difference between like scientific theory and modeling? Does that make any sense?
Yes. Okay. Scientific theories and modelings are not mutually exclusive. Science uses models, but not all scientific theories rely on models. You see, here there is a fundamental distinction between what you might call theorization about the world and modeling the world. Theorization about the world ultimately only give you generalizations, not particularities. Sometimes you have to zoom in on a specific details of a very particular phenomenon, precisely because that phenomenon might actually have different scales. Some of those scales are not covered by your scientific theory, which you use to represent it. And hence, you have to kind of a little bit of optimization here. Of course, any distortion, and it's not just about modeling, theories also distort reality. You see, scientific theories also distort, can potentially distort. But the thing is that what is important here is some sort of license or guarantee, a kind of regulatory procedure that can actually track this kind of back and forth coordination between the theory and the real phenomena or model or a specific phenomenon. Without that, we are not in the business of science at all. Of course, science can go, we both know it. I mean, look at today's contemporary neoliberal science in America. The scientists are just like, they're worse than the worst theologians of the medieval ages. This is why that these things require epistemic investigation. Attorneys who actually look into the epistemological procedures involved in these procedures. But we cannot just simply say that we cannot trust them on some, you know, kind of psychological assumption. We absolutely need to know what is exactly the fundament of such procedures in order for, in fact, to know how we can formulate the right kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind clarifying exactly what the distinction is between the algorithmic computational model and the mathematical model?
Well, you see, at this point, I would say that this distinction is no longer a hard distinction. It's actually a soft distinction and will eventually evaporate. The thing is that from a classical perspective, usually the mathematical model is what you might call to be non-recursive from a computational standpoint, whereas algorithmic ones are recursive. They can be arithmetically encoded. As simple as that. Of course, this, you see, all of this stuff, we will talk about this, all of these classifications are predicated on the fact that we have an abundance of meta-theoretical hidden assumptions here. Is mathematics different from computer science? Can geometry be said to give us elements or properties of abstract entities which cannot be encoded by arithmetic? so on and so forth. You see, this is the moment that we understand that even these such classifications are prone to negotiation or renegotiation, precisely because they are predicated, they are undergirded by a certain kinds of assumptions in the domain of mathematics, computational theory, so on and so forth.
I had a really
Another example is Carnap. Carnap, logical structure of the world. So his models are essentially logical. Precisely why, I mean, not the late Carnap. I'm talking about the Carnap who wrote the logical structure of world, of power. Now here, the meta-theoretical assumption that Carnap later actually admit that was behind his initial assumption was that all mathematical statement can be reduced to formal logic of its time. But this is unwarranted. This is unwarranted.
in the background of I don't remember who asked the question or made the statement about the sort of predictive policing model and the way that moves from like descriptive to prescriptive activity, or like starts to distort the data. But it actually, in an interesting way, when you mentioned Carnap, it points, like the way I'm reading how you're sort of building this class and relating it to models is very much like, to me, parallel to the move from early to late Carnap. And there's a lot of deep assumptions in there about reality. And I guess like the nature of reality as like stabilized, or the relationship of like thought to reality. And like the way that to some degree models are this like linguistic tool by which thought sort of prescribes and changes reality. So it's not necessarily to assume like we can always reduce bias to nothing, but actually it becomes refining what biases we want to amplify in the system. Like maybe there is no pure descriptive models, like they always have this prescriptive side that builds to where
yes,
we want them to.
no, I mean, fantastic, really fantastic insight, Justin.
I was going to ask you if you would talk about like the assumptions in there about reality, and maybe that's too soon or whatever, but
it's probably too soon. But let me just give you a very you actually said something that I completely forgot. So we say that, okay, models distort reality, but doesn't this already assume that you have some sort of hidden assumptions about what reality is? Sellar's myth of the given rears its head here. You see, when we are in the business of science, we really don't take for granted what reality is. Reality is not a telltale heart that tells what it is to us by way of some sort of private access. It is a matter of engagement, of a procedural and tractable engagement with phenomenal appearances, such that we can refine this engagement over time. We can select what kind of biases we want to choose, what biases we want to mitigate, so on and so forth. But yes, absolutely, I would say that and to be honest with you, this is I just don't want to talk about this. I mean, you have heard me, but for the new our new friends, is that this is really the kernel of what I would call orthodox Marxism today. Their enmity toward the scientific method. And not all Marxists. I'm a Marxist. I'm a proud, I want to have the torch of scientific rationality. But the thing is that, okay, so my Marxist friends, you say that these models can fundamentally give us, these bad distortions of reality. Sure, they can, of course. But the whole point is that the very fact here is that we have a better grasp of what is exactly being distorted and what it distorts it, precisely because such procedures are tractable, are more or less transparent semantically. Whereas, if you say that as if we had some sort of real traction under real forces, you are in the business of mysticism, not science or philosophy. You already have some hidden assumptions in your closet about what reality is. And then you are essentially in the business of dogmatism.
Can I so the statements that we derive from models, in this sense, they would neither be analytic nor synthetic, right?
Well, that was your challenge. That's not my challenge. That was your challenge that I wanted to answer it. Go on, Jovan.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, if it's analytic or synthetic, then there's an immediate relation to the real, or at least an idealized relationship towards which we can, I don't know, think from there. And so, if it's neither analytic nor synthetic, and I don't want to go into the whole Quinian thing, but yeah, I don't know.
Why don't you go? I think
The Quinian?
go. You should go. You should go for every one of us. Bring it on.
No, I just like the yeah, I've been reading some Wimsatt lately, and I like a lot of what Wimsatt is saying, but I still think that the Quinian movement is always dependent on a kind of there's still something relative about it that is not satisfying, and I think maybe models is a kind of satisfactory like answer to it or something. I don't know.
In what sense? Okay, not for me, but for our friends. What would be the relative component of the Quinian position?
So, as far as I understand, the Quinian position takes let's call it the web of I don't remember what he calls it, the web of belief or something, where every time we change, it's the transcendental project in a sense, where we transform what is given, and so what is given changes the way in which we have a mental or cognitive relation to reality, and so our cognitive understanding changes as well when that happens. But I think it's still a problem insofar as Quinians still there's still a speculative project where it's still somewhat analytic, I think, that you can still speculate on the procedures of the futural, etc., etc.
Right, I see.
Okay. And then there's also the Laurelian, like a way of doing away with the analytic synthetic distinction, but I'm not gonna go there. But yeah,
yes. To be honest with you, I really don't have any kind of settled idea about such matters. However, tomorrow morning, I might say that what I said to you was complete and utter bullshit. Nevertheless, today I can say that this whole idea of analyticity versus syntheticness the Quinean formal procedures or Carnapian formal procedures to arrive at phenomena are not diktats about broad diktats about how we should approach about the world. But as a matter of fact, they are necessary and scale sensitive ways of implementing our methods. At some scale, things can be synthetic. At some other scale, things can be analytic. You see, models, when we are simply looking at their structure, their correspondence with their descriptions, namely equations or so on and so forth, they can actually be understood in their own right as analytic procedures, analytic statements. But once we try to somehow coordinate this or apply it to a real target system, then we are in the business of synthetic. What is really important here, I would say that for us to, in fact, to talk coherently about such procedures, as whether they are synthetic or analytic, we should be also capable of distinguishing the different scales, the different contexts in which we both study the real phenomenon and the model. Some of you have been silent. I will come after you if you don't talk. Alan?
Well, I was just trying to process what you were talking about, the discussion of where to situate models between analytic and synthetic. I'm just trying to process that. So I'm not a Kantian or anything, but it's an interesting discussion, I think.
Yes, yes. No, I mean, to be honest with you, I taught Kant, Theo, what was it? Like, how many months ago? Like, so I started to, I had this idea that I'm this staunch Kantian. But then when I started to teach Kant, then I noticed that, oh my goodness, I am actually anti-Kant. You never know, and this is the beauty of philosophy. You start with the presupposition, but you end up in what you're always afraid of to be. Thought takes you to places that you never expect in your entire life. This is what I say, it's the freedom of thought. The freedom of thought trumps, sorry to use that word, trumps over psychological convictions in every instance. And this idea is actually sublimated in the scientific method. Science, as Ray Brazier said, develops not because of what you think is, psychologically speaking, what should be done, but despite of it. People thought that, according to all this great canon of Aquinas, Bible, so on and so forth, great court of Catholicism, absolutely Earth should be flat, because it's just, according to all of these connections that we have, if Earth is not flat, then we are not good species. We are not children of God. Well. Science not only showed that Earth is neither flat, but also it showed that we are not children of God. There is no such a thing as an intelligence design. And the whole point is that the scientific rationality even though it has been appropriated by the neoliberalist system, still it can be reappropriated back by the philosophical system, by the method of thinking rigorously. As such, it is still offering us the best way of shedding our human biases. Regardless, let's get back to our modeling, as parochial as it might be. So, we talked about Schelling segregation. And Schelling segregation, have you noticed that the kind of meta-theoretical assumptions that we were talking about are actually more prevalent in Schilling's computational modeling of segregation than the other previous two methods that I mentioned, the concrete model and the mathematical Volterra's model. The thing is that in Schelling proposition with regard to the idea of preference, the choice of 30% satisfaction, that if it is under 30%, I'm going to leave. I'm going to get out of this stupid neighborhood. That is a utility function. Of course, on what grounds we have such a percentage? On what grounds we couldn't have any, like a higher or a lower percentage? You see, precisely because the utility function is dictated by the theoretical assumptions which are already presumed and taken for granted within a game theoretic framework in which Schelling operates. But then, so if this is a hidden assumption that should be further investigated, then you can even go further and say, as Brandom says, Robert Brandom says, why do we need to actually have a purely game theoretical model here, or a game theoretic theory here, as basically the platform of modelization? All I am trying to say is that the interpreted structure for any given real phenomenon has hidden assumptions. And these hidden assumptions can be categorized to two kinds of assumptions, the explicit ones and the implicit ones. The explicit ones are the ones that are given by the theory under which the model behaves and should behave. The implicit ones are actually quite scary, which are usually called the meta-theoretical assumptions. And the meta-theoretical assumptions are the ones which we take for granted, precisely because we are already inhabiting within a specific theoretical framework and not others, you know? In fact, you can say the same thing about Volterra's equations. Why differential calculus? Why not some other kind of field of mathematics as undergirding for our equations of prey and predation? Questions here? So I mentioned that, my apologies. So now that we have a little bit of information about models, we should also talk about, and we also introduced models as what you might call to be indirect abstractions. In the sense that when we are dealing with models, once we deal with the models, at that very stage, we don't actually talk about as if we were talking about reality. We are already assuming two things. One, that this model has some sort of partial, at the very least, partial isomorphy, some sort of correspondence with a real phenomenon. Precisely because how we construct our model, either according to the measurements, like the concrete model of the Bay Area, or some sort of equations, we have some already, we have observed that they can actually reveal some patterns in the universe according to some sort of selection of mathematical structures, or for that matter, computational procedures. Now, models, if they can be called indirect ways of dealing with the world, in order for us to understand the indirect, we should also propose a direct form of abstract representation, so that we don't confuse models with other kind of theoretical procedures which are usually used in the history of science but cannot be called modeling. One of the greatest examples of this abstract direct representation, which is not a modeling per se, is the story of Mendeleev's construction of the periodic system, which of course also has a very humble beginning. When assigned to teach courses on inorganic chemistry at the University of St. Petersburg, Mendeleev found that there was no good inorganic chemistry textbook available at this time. Inorganic texts lacked an organized and coherent structure from which to characterize the known elements and inorganic reactions. In order to deepen his and his students' understanding of the elements, Mendeleev essentially wanted to develop a classification system that could explicate or elucidate their underlying properties. This, of course, would have allowed him for a more systematic understanding of the properties of each element, the reactions each element could, participate in, and trends underlying these properties and such reactions. Mendeleev faced, to do these kinds of tasks, he actually confronted or faced a daunting theoretical challenge. Samples of pure elements have many, many chemically important properties, any of which might form the basis of a classification system. To the point that, when, of course, here, this is another thing that I want to say. So people say that, well, all models are idealization, idealizations are just distortions. No. Idealizations are pragmatically useful. If there, in fact, was no method of idealization or simplification, we couldn't even talk anything about the world. And now here, we are actually not in the realm of modeling. We are actually in the realm of what you might call to be theoretical representation, like such as Mendeleev's table of elements. So, given the complexities of reactions and properties of elements that he had, he couldn't really say anything about how to actually talk about this stuff. Because, any kind of talk that might come up can be actually arbitrary. You see, simplification mitigates arbitrariness. And that's really important. So, as I said, Mendeleev faced a daunting theoretical challenge. Samples of the pure elements had many chemically important properties, any of which might form the basis of a classification system. Now, one might sort elements by color with various, other kinds of properties bunched together with it. In the end, however, Mendeleev decided to focus his attention on finding trends in properties of valency, isomorphism, and most importantly, atomic weight, abstracting the weight from all of the other properties. So you see, we are still very, very similar to the stuff that we were talking about modeling, abstracting away. This is kind of almost like the AI problem, a frame problem. You know, a robot cannot navigate the environment if it cannot abstract away from some details that are unnecessary for its navigation. So atomic weight is a familiar concept, but valency and what 19th century chemists called isomorphism may not be. Elements are said to be isomorphic when families of salts containing chemically similar but distinct metals form similar crystal shapes. Valency, on the other hand, refers to the combining ratio of an element. For example, a carbon is tetravalent, meaning that it can combine with 4 equivalents of hydrogen. So Mendeleev's first step was to organize the elements by atomic weight. This gave him a one-dimensional ordering of the elements, which served as an initial organizational device, but did not reveal any information about the elements underlying the structure or their unity. Focusing next on valency and isomorphism, Mendeleev tried to find other dimensions along which to organize the elements. In modern terms, we can think of his next step as trying to figure out where each period or row of the periodic table ended. In some accounts, Mendeleev is said to have put the names and properties of elements on cards and played chemical solitaire on long train journeys until he found satisfactory ordering of the known elements. Mendeleev then announced his ordering of elements according to their weight and properties. This ordering, which later became known as periodic table of the elements, organized the elements in the order of atomic weight and then in columns or groups in virtue of their chemical properties. When the elements were properly ordered, Mendeleev argued, one could see the periodic dependence of elemental properties under atomic weight. This principle, which Mendeleev called the periodic law, is one of the bedrock principles which organizes the entire science of chemistry. It is still recognized one of the most basic patterns among all chemical phenomena. Now, the thing is that Mendeleev's theoretical achievements are sometimes overlooked because of the suspicion that the periodic table is merely a classification. It's just like, you might say, the Library of Congress. It makes certain trends explicit, but it has been argued that the table does not actually explain anything. The Library of Congress did a service to humanity by developing a relatively rational, tractable system for organizing books in our libraries. But surely, we would not want to treat this as a theoretical achievement of scientific weight. Similarly, it has been argued that Mendeleev articulated an important classification system, but not a theory as such. For example, Shapiro claimed that Mendeleev discovered what Mendeleev discovered was an ordered domain, and that orderings of domains are themselves sensitive of several different sorts of lines of further research, but not themselves can be considered as theories. I think, and of course, Weisenberg also says this in his book, that this is actually quite a mistaken view for many reasons. The first reason involves the remarkable predictions that Mendeleev was able to make on the basis of his periodic system. For example, in 1869, he noted that there were gaps in his table for 3 elements. In 1869, also on the basis of this gap about tantamount with coinciding with other information about chemical trends encoded already on the table. Sorry. He hypothesized the existence of what he called Eka aluminum or Eka silicon or Eka boron. The properties of these novel elements are listed basically in the earliest tables that he draws, where he basically predicts that such elements, these lost elements, these missing elements, can in fact be discovered quite adequately based, at the very least, on their atomic weight, specific gravity, and atomic volume or density. Mendeleev predictions might look like trivial exercises, making inferences about missing books on the shelf, if we were going to use the Library of Babel or Library of Congress, or filling empty slots. This underestimates, however, the significance of his achievement. Mendeleev had no empirical knowledge that there were, in fact, any empty slots to be filled, an element yet to be discovered. His task was thus not as simple as interpolating the properties of unknown elements on the basis of known elements. He first needed to hypothesize the existence of the missing elements by analyzing the theoretical structure he had created. Then he was able to use the trends posited by the periodic table to make predictions about the properties of the missing elements. This prediction was a theoretical, not merely classificatory achievement. However, here, and we probably talk about this at more length next session, when we try to separate the direct abstract representation from an indirect mediated abstraction, namely modeling. But nevertheless, we are, in both cases, in the realm of theoretical structure. We, in the procedure of science, we not always use models. Sometimes we do use things like Mendeleev's ways of abstraction. But also in the procedure of science, particularly specialized sciences, we not always use direct abstract representation. Sometimes we choose, according to a certain criteria, which shall be discussed at length, we go for modeling, namely mediated representations. Questions here?
Earlier in the seminar, people mentioned architectural models, and it seems to me it's maybe hand-wavy level. An architectural model is a bit like a taxonomy. This sort of like, it presents the structure like the periodic table of this is how certain things are in relation to one another, but it's not necessarily as complete as a model with moving parts. You can see the whole system interacting. I'm not sure if that's a useful connection.
I would say that it's actually also different from the abstract model in the way that we talked about Mendeleev, but another example would be Darwin's theory. Is a study of fossils. The thing is that does a simple architectural model, I'm not saying that it doesn't, is the question for our architect friends. A simple, I'm not talking about some sort of lavish computational modeling. A simple architectural model, as it is usually defined in the field of architecture, can it actually predict that there might be some additional elements that can be added later on into the system? Essentially, you see what Mendeleev does. Sure, it is a classificatory system, but it's not just a simple classificatory system. It's a classificatory system with predictive valence. It can actually predict that there are such and such elements are missing, and as long as, according to these categories, such and such properties are being satisfied, we can say that we have those elements on our table. It doesn't explain anything, unlike models. Models do explain. Models do explain.
Yeah. Can I add something? Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I think, as you said, it's totally different because actually the reason, I mean, I was wondering, I also wrote something that each model proposes a rule, like a new mechanism, and actually it starts from the reason of its creation, right? I mean, you make a model because you want to arrive in something. In architectural models is a total different story, I agree, but you have two steps there, not two steps, two levels, like let's say of why you making it. And the one is that you first represent the existing part. I mean, you have to somehow represent and show how the existing space is, and then you make an addition to that space with a totally new fiction. I mean, the building, or I don't know, the scale you're referring to with its model, which is the totally new thing you are proposing. And then there are so many things about it. I mean, I'm talking about the physical models now, in the states that you, yeah. Like you represent, you have to make a decision of how you represent the existing. You need to make many abstraction because you don't need all this data. You don't need the trees around it, except of if all the project is about the trees. You need to make the rules, the decisions that how you represent it and why you put that data in it. So it is also an experimentation though, because when you propose anything and you are using the tool of modeling, you are doing experimentation of how you can create the best space in that existing space. It's analyzing its spatial, with a T, data, and you need to find a solution and you try this and that. It is an experiment. It's not that, it's, of course, it's arbitrary because you don't have the total bad results, let's say, with science. Of course, you can have with bad architecture, but I mean, it's not like you have to find a truth as in science.
Sure. May I ask you a question, Artemis? So do you think that, I mean, of course, as you said, contemporary architectural models can, of course, be supplemented with, computational models, as we have seen, so on and so forth, algorithms and stuff. But in the classical, like, for example, modernist architecture, do you think that what counts as an architectural model, can it actually predict anything about the target system? Or it's just a representation?
Yeah, that's the point. That if the reason of making this model is your proposition, you're gonna experiment on how the form you are proposing is going to approximately always act in the existing space. But if you're making a physical or a computational, let's say, model of a space, again, it is all about the reason. It adds some new data when you are focusing, as you said, when you're zooming in, you augment and information about reality. Yeah, some
Yes.
certain data in order to find something. Or maybe you can find it accidentally, but if you don't experiment by augmenting and abstracting other data, you cannot understand it.
I see. I see. Thank you so much. Anyone else? By the way, unfortunately, we have 5 more minutes. I have to go a little bit early today. I have another talk, but as I mentioned, any kind of early closure, we will compensate it at the end, so don't worry about it. But can we have one more question?
I had one announcement, just a logistical announcement. For next week, I think we have 2 presenters, I think, of the readings.
Not next week. Next week we don't have any class deal.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, not next week, but the next session.
Yes, next session. Yes.
2 presenters, and then.
And who are the presenters?
I guess we can, if people want to volunteer to present on the reading.
Volunteer, or I will come after you.
Yeah. So 2 presenters and 2 respondents. And you'll have a little bit more time to do the readings and stuff.
Can we just pick the presenters randomly?
Any person. I mean, don't worry. I'm not a dictator teacher. Any person would be fine, and I would actually we can exchange email and okay, Mikey, super. Okay, what is the next person? Okay,
great. So 2 presenters, and then the 2 respondents.
And by the way, our reading is still the same. Mary Hess, Michael Weisberg. We are not going to get any too esoteric stuff yet. Any question? Any question? Last question.
Do we present the whole book, or we make a specific element of the book that appeals to us, and we expand on this in depth, because it's such big books.
Yes, but don't scare people now. You are scaring up people. No.
Is it possible to just like zoom in and talk about?
Okay, let's say
fiction or Galilean model.
You're making a model of it, actually, right? You're zooming in and you're choosing what you're going to simulate.
Let's say that. Okay, we can. How about this? Okay, let's not get too overexcited. How about we actually read the 3rd chapter of Michael Weisberg, The Anatomy of Models. It is, I would say, like 20 pages. I mean, it's doable somehow, I would say. I don't know. But anyway, don't worry about it. We are not academics.
Sean.
Well, yes, Sean, everything is in the Google Drive. If you go to the class or Google Classroom, if you click on the folder of the Google Drive, you should be able to see them.
Okay. Thanks.
I have just kind of a quick question, looking at the implicit versus explicit, and then use of models, particularly like in interdisciplinary work. Like if a certain model with the understanding that it has, it's built for like a specific reason, content. Is there much application in using that model in a different discipline or different use, without kind of like the implicit, explicit content of it or intentions of it getting in the way?
Yes, well, the thing is that there is no rule about it, but in the canon of engineering, at least, and complex science, this usually is not advised unless we have actually looked carefully into the theoretical range of the said model. Yes, sure. If the theoretical range goes over different contexts of application, we can try it. But in fact, if we try it, if the range, the theoretical range, doesn't cover any other context, that would lead certainly, absolutely, to distorted data. In fact, it is forbidden in the realm of modeling.
Cool.
And please, Theo is going to, of course, upload the sidebar and the video to the Google Classroom. Any of you who have a question, please feel free to ask those questions on the Google Classroom, and either me or someone else will reply to you. Don't be shy. We are just trying to go over some certain topics. It's not just new to you, it's also new to me. Okay.
The respondent, Justin, is just going to kind of, maybe if you just had a couple questions to ask about the text, or if you have questions about what Mikey and Adam present. It's just going to start the conversation. I think it's
yes. Okay. Let's not get way too overambitious here, like academia, where we are already, there is a whip, and we have to do certain kinds of stuff. No. It's a heuristic experiment here. Let Adam and Mikey do their, responding. And then we will see how people interact with the, those people who are, creating a response. And then after that, we can come up with some sort of a more standard procedure. But until then, I don't think that we should get it too involved with details.
That sounds good. I think Joven also said he would have some questions.
Sure. That would be fantastic. That would be fantastic. Yes, absolutely.
All right, so we're at our time, and I'll go ahead and end the broadcast now, if that's okay.
Absolutely.